Aloha students, this is Mrs. S. from Elmwood. For the next few weeks, you'll be working on a sculpture project inspired by Andy Goldsworthy, as well as Ansel Adams. Some things that you will need to remember is our vocabulary. Ephemeral, meaning lasting for a very short time. Document is the evidence that supports the work. This is where we will be looking at Ansel Adams' work. Landscape, evident in both Goldsworthy and Ansel Adams' work, means visible features of an area of land, its landforms, and how they integrate with natural or man-made features. Site-specific refers to a work of art designed specifically for a particular location that has an interrelationship with that location. First off, we'll talk about Andy Goldsworthy. He is a British sculptor and photographer who was born in 1956. He uses natural materials such as leaves, sticks, ice, and water, and he grew up working as a farm laborer. Goldsworthy has become one of the most prominent and iconic contemporary sculptors. In photographs, sculptures, installations, and films, Goldsworthy documents his explorations of the effects of time, the relationship between humans and their natural surroundings, and the beauty in loss and regeneration. Goldsworthy's permanent projects and ephemeral works contrast in their scale, tension, and lifetime, but are unified through their responses to the environment and his constant investigation into understanding the landscape he is in. Goldsworthy themes are holes, portals, the walk, the journey, along with the full documentation of all the completed work. This installation consists of 9 hollow domes, each with a hole at the top made of stackable slabs of slate rock. The installation is in a ground level gallery that can be viewed from above, offering a new perspective on an ancient architectural form. Perspective, how we view an artwork, is very important in Goldsworthy's work. Here we have one of his sketches for a project called Oak Branches. You can see how he's sketched out how this piece will possibly go back into nature. Form was achieved by stacking one branch upon another in a process that is closer to layering a stone than to weaving. Keeping control of the form was challenging. This piece is called Handheld to Thin Ice. Goldsworthy states that he has found and worked with red in many countries and talked of it as the earth's vein, a description confirmed by the realization that the earth and stone are red because of their iron content, which is also why our blood is red. The beauty of red is its connection to life underwritten by fragility, pain, and violence. Layering makes connections to geology and growth. This sense of life draws me to nature, he states, but with it also comes an equally strong sense of death. I cannot walk far before seeing something dead and decaying. Uprooted trees, fallen rocks, a grip on beauty is necessary for me to feel and make sense of its underlying precariousness. So many of my sculptures are within a hair's breadth of failure. Beauty does not avoid difficulty, but hovers dangerously above it, like walking on the thin ice. Goldsworthy also uses natural sewing to bring together his sculptures. So not many of his pieces use man-made building materials, unless it's absolutely necessary. Here's a stack of leaves that he's sewn together with sticks. Notice the layers. It's very simple, but very conceptual at the same time. Now we move on to Ansel Adams, one of my favorite photographers. He's an American photographer who was born in 1902 and passed away in 19 1884. His black and white images of America's West transformed landscape photography. He joined the Sierra Club as a teen. Adams played around with the horizon line in his photographs. When the horizon line was placed high in the frame, it would help the viewer to realize the scale of the image in comparison to the sky that surrounded it. This created a godlike perspective. In 1941, at the height of World War II, but before the bombing on Pearl Harbor, Adams received a commission from the U.S. Department of the Interior to photograph national parks and other notable landscapes. In exchange for film, paper, and darkroom chemicals, and a day rate of $20, Adams would provide photographic murals for display in the halls of the Department of Interior. Although Adams took some 225 photographs for the project, including this image, the project was later dropped, never to be resumed, due to America's sudden involvement in the war. Grand Teton is a masterful photograph that draws the viewer's eye from the river in the foreground, around the bend to the snow-capped mountains of the Grand Teton, and up towards the brooding sky in the background. Adams' vivid landscape makes a use of sharp focus and natural light to capture the true splendor of the national parks. As Adams said of his vista, the grand lift of the Tetons is more than a mechanistic fold and faulting of the earth's crust. It becomes a primal gesture of the earth beneath a greater sky. Adams, who was always more drawn to the natural world than the people in it, was criticized, however, for ignoring political events at home and abroad, most famously by Henry Carter Bresson. "The world is going to pieces," Bresson chided, "and people like Ansel Adams and Weston are photographing rocks." Although this image is something of an icon, the mural-sized print didn't make its way onto the walls of the Department of the Interior until 2010. President Barack Obama's Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, decided to hang the results of Adams' project, which had been cut short by the 1942 bombing of Pearl Harbor. Adams was always committed to sharing his energy and abilities in support of the things he believed in, which were photography and the environment. Nature, and Yosemite in particular, served as a place of healing for Adams, who survived the deadly Spanish influenza in 1919. As Adams matured, his black and white images became associated with political issues. With the Sierra Club, he advocated in 1936 for the establishment of Kings Canyon as a national park. His images of the Kings and Ken Rivers were used effectively in Washington, D.C. during congressional discussions that ultimately yielded the 1940 legislation founding Kings Canyon National Park. When Adams photographed, he almost saw the photograph as a stand-in for the experience that people could have in the park. After Adams' photos of Kings Canyon in California helped preserve the region as a national park in 1940, Secretary of the Interior Harold L. Eakes hired Adams to shoot one or more photographic murals of the country to decorate the Department of the Interior building in Washington, D.C. Adams envisioned a much more expansive, much more fully developed survey of the U.S. national parks. Adams felt like some of the pictures could be used as murals, that he felt he could make a whole set of pictures of the parks that could be used for other purposes as well. Adams is also perhaps the most widely known and beloved photographer in the history of the United States. The popularity of his work has only increased since his death. Adams' most important work was devoted to what was or appeared to be the country's remaining fragments of untouched wilderness, especially in national parks and other protected areas in the American West. He was also a vigorous and outspoken leader of the conservation movement. Not until a generation later did it come to be widely understood that a concern for the character and health of the natural landscape was in fact a social priority of the highest order. For this project, you will need your sketchbook, pencil, markers, crayons, or colored pencils, scissors and glue, a box of some sort, and bags to hold your supplies. Now, your supplies can be things that you have around the house, maybe things that are brought on the art cart, or even natural supplies. Some of the steps. I have done 2 examples. One is based off of this image of Andy Goldsworthy, a leaf blanket floated in water. Here you can see my sketch. I've labeled the materials that I'll be using or possibly using, and I've referenced the image that I'm looking at. For this, I have made a plexi box and I'm using resin that I will be dyeing. So I started mixing my resin after I build my box, and I'm pouring my resin layers in a little bit at a time for each layer to cure. I'm using different colors and different thickness of layers, adding white so that there's this show of movement of it imitating water. The professional and documented images will be coming soon, so please revisit the PowerPoint in the next week. My second example is based off of holes of Andy's Goldsworthy. I look at this image and I think of this repetitive holes that is formed, and I think about what materials I might have on hand, and that becomes glue. I know when I was younger, I would let glue dry and peel it off. Granted, my glue dots took a lot longer to dry than I researched. When I researched how long it would take for glue dots to dry, it said 6 hours. It took closer to 24 hours. After my glue dots dried, I thought I was going to use toothpicks like my sketch, but decided to use Q-tips that were cut up because of the white color of them. Now, as I was building, I had this extra material at the end of the Q-tips, and I was trying to figure out, what else could this be? Remembering that Goldsworthy projects are about tension, I decided to create that visual tension with the Q-tips in the box along with the glue dots. Now remember, these professionally documented images will be coming soon, so please refer back to the PowerPoint. I've included some video resources about Ansel Adams' style and Andy Goldsworthy talking about 2 of his projects. Now, to do, what you're going to need is to gather your supplies. This can be natural or other. You're going to want to sketch out your design. Make sure you're labeling what materials you're going to be using. Think about what these materials mean, how you can change the use of these materials. Then you're going to begin layering your design in your box. You might have to start building outside of the box and then putting it back in. Play around with your materials and the composition, and then you'll be documenting your sculpture. You're going to need 3 color images and 1 black and white. Here's a timeline. That first week, gather materials, sketching, arranging. Don't be afraid that if your sketch changes from your final project, that's okay, because you are responding to the materials that you're gathering. Next week is plan, collect, build, and then continue to build. That last week, where you're finishing building, cleaning up the inside, making it really nice and pristine, and then you are documenting your sculpture. And make sure you're turning it in on canvas with the correct labels.